Daesung adjusted his viewing screen for the third time that morning, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. The ancient star chart floating before him showed the same impossible thing he had seen in dozens of other maps. Nothing. Not empty space marked as unexplored, not restricted zones with warning symbols. Just nothing, as if the universe simply ended at a specific line. The young Vrellan cartographer's antennae twitched with confusion. He had been working at the Galactic Consortium's Central Archive for only 6 months, but he knew enough to recognize when something made no sense. Every map he digitized, whether it came from the Krillian Empire, the Thorian Collective, or even the ancient predecessors, showed the same peculiar boundary. Beyond human space, the maps just stopped. Daesung pulled up another file, this one a navigation chart created 200 years ago by an explorer species that had never even met humans. The same blank edge appeared at precisely the coordinates where human territory now existed. His mandibles clicked together nervously. How could pre-contact maps show the same boundaries as modern ones? Interesting project? A voice made him jump. Daesung turned to find Heejin standing behind his workstation. The human diplomatic attaché smiled pleasantly, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. She often walked through the archive, supposedly on routine inspections, but Daesung had noticed she appeared whenever anyone worked with maps near human space. Just routine digitization, Daesung said, trying to sound casual. Though I did notice something odd about the coordinate systems. Odd how? Heejin's smile never wavered, but something in her tone made Daesung's survival instincts flare. The maps all seemed to terminate at similar points. Probably just a formatting error in the database. He forced his antennae to stay still, a Vrellan sign of disinterest. Heejin nodded slowly. Probably. Old archives can be quirky. You know, if you need a break from this sector, I can authorize access to the Andromeda collections. Fascinating stuff, much more complete data. It was not a suggestion. Daesung recognized a polite warning when he heard one, even across species barriers. That sounds wonderful. I will request the transfer this afternoon. Excellent. Heejin's smile warmed slightly. There is a great noodle place near the archive. My treat if you want lunch. Daesung agreed, though his appetite had vanished. Over lunch, Heejin was charming and funny, sharing stories about her diplomatic work and asking about his homeworld. She never mentioned the maps again, but the message was clear. He had been noticed and he should move on. But Daesung could not move on. That evening, alone in his small apartment, he pulled up the archives on his personal terminal. He started cross-referencing, pulling maps from every species, every era, every corner of the consortium's vast collection. The pattern held. Every single map, without exception, treated the space around human territory as if it were the edge of reality itself. More disturbing was what he found in the footnotes of old explorer logs. A Krillian captain had written, "Approached coordinates 447 Alpha as ordered. Fleet consensus voted to turn back. No one could articulate why. Recommend sector be marked as complete." Another entry from a Thorian science vessel. Instruments show normal space ahead. Crew reports overwhelming sense we should not proceed. Captain agrees. Returning to base. Daesung's hands trembled as he read report after report. Exploration fleets turning back for no reason. Survey missions that simply declared certain sectors complete without actually surveying them. Science vessels experiencing unanimous crew decisions to change course whenever they approached the boundaries of what would later become human space. The next morning, he tried asking his colleague Velthar about it. The older cartographer's face went carefully neutral. Focus on your assigned work, young one. The archive is vast. No need to look for puzzles where none exist. But the mathematical probability of this pattern occurring naturally is none of our concern, Velthar interrupted, his tone final. We map what we are given. We do not question why. Daesung tried 2 more colleagues. Both gave similar responses, their discomfort visible. It was as if everyone knew something they refused to speak aloud. The silence itself was a language, and it said, "Do not ask." 3 days later, Elder Morphic summoned him. The ancient being's office sat at the archive's highest level, surrounded by windows that looked out over Velthera Prime's glittering cityscape. Morphix had served the archive for 5 centuries, longer than most species' recorded histories. His form was mostly energy now, held together by technology Daesung did not understand. "Sit, young Daesung." Morphix's voice sounded like wind through stone. I have been watching your work. You are talented, meticulous, curious. Thank you, Elder. Curiosity is a gift. It is also a burden. Morphix's energy field flickered with colors Daesung's eyes could barely process. You have noticed the maps. It was not a question. Daesung's antennae drooped with resignation. Yes, Elder. In 500 years, I have seen 3 cartographers notice what you have noticed. The first retired the next day and moved to a farming colony. He lived a long, peaceful life and never touched a star chart again. Morphix paused, his field dimming. The second began investigating more deeply. He disappeared 4 months later. No trace was ever found. Daesung felt his respiratory spiracles tighten. The third stopped asking questions. He continued working here for another 40 years and is now quite happy teaching students on his homeworld. He chose not to know. Morphix drifted closer, his ancient presence filling the room. I am giving you the same choice they received. Continue your work in other sectors and have a distinguished career. Or pursue this question and accept whatever consequences follow. What consequences? Daesung asked, though he was not sure he wanted the answer. I do not know. I chose not to ask many years ago. But I can tell you this, the answer exists, it is real, and it is maintained by forces far beyond the Archive's authority. Morphix returned to his place by the window. You have until tomorrow to decide. Choose wisely, young scholar. Some knowledge cannot be unlearned. That night, Daesung stood on his balcony looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the lights of Velthara, was the boundary where every map stopped, where the universe, according to every known chart, simply ended. He thought about the comfortable life he could have, asking no questions, mapping safe sectors, growing old in peaceful ignorance. Then he thought about the maps themselves, all showing the same impossible truth. Something had shaped the galaxy's knowledge, had created a blind spot in the collective consciousness of every spacefaring civilization. And whatever that something was, it centered on humanity. Daesung made his decision. The restricted section of the Central Archive required 3 levels of authorization to enter. Daesung had none of them, but he had discovered that the ventilation systems were designed by the same engineering firm across 12 consortium facilities, and their maintenance schedules were publicly available. At 3 a.m, when only skeleton staff remained, he slipped into a service tunnel and made his way through the ductwork. The restricted stacks were smaller than he expected. Row after row of data crystals, each one sealed with quantum locks, but paper documents, actual physical documents, sat in climate-controlled cases along the walls. Daesung had learned that the oldest, most sensitive records were kept in formats that could not be remotely accessed or deleted. You had to physically be here to read them. He found the consortium charter on his third search. The original document, signed by the founding species 2,000 years ago, was displayed in a pressure case. Daesung used his personal scanner, working quickly. Most of the charter was standard diplomatic language about trade agreements and mutual defense. But there, in Article 7, Section 3, was a clause he had never seen mentioned in any history class. Recognition of pre-existing territorial sovereignties. All member species acknowledge and respect boundaries established by civilizations who demonstrate clear and continuous control of designated spatial regions, regardless of said civilization's membership status in the consortium. Such boundaries shall remain inviolate and exempt from standard cartographic surveys, exploration initiatives, or territorial negotiations. The clause had been added 203 years ago, 3 years after first contact with humanity. Daesung photographed everything he could before retreating through the ducts. Back in his apartment, he studied the images until sunrise. The clause essentially gave humans complete control over their space and whatever lay beyond it. More importantly, it exempted human territory from the surveys and mapping expeditions that documented every other corner of consortium space. But why would the consortium agree to such terms? Humanity had been a single-planet species when they joined. They had no fleet, no colonies, no leverage. Yet somehow they had negotiated a clause that every other species simply accepted without question. Over the next week, Daesung began visiting the lower districts of Velthara Prime during his off hours. The docks and markets where merchants and independent traders gathered, people who lived between the official channels and saw things the consortium preferred to ignore. He asked careful questions in dingy bars, looking for anyone old enough to remember first contact. Most people laughed or ignored him, but finally, in a cantina that smelled of sulfur and cheap stimulants, a Krillian merchant captain named Bora agreed to talk. The ancient captain's carapace was scarred and patched, marking decades of deep space travel. Her eye clusters studied Daesung with weary amusement. You want to know about first contact? Why? Bora's voice rattled like stones in a can. Research. Academic curiosity. Bora laughed, a harsh clicking sound. Sure, kid. Let me tell you what they do not teach in schools. She drank deeply from her mug. I was there. Not at first contact itself, but close enough. I was running cargo near the outer rim when every military vessel within 10 sectors received the same order. Retreat and observe. Not engage. Not investigate. Retreat. Retreat from what? From the humans we had just found. Single-planet species just figured out faster-than-light travel. Totally unprepared for galactic society. Standard procedure would be observation, then careful contact, then integration. Instead, every warship pulled back to minimum safe distance and just watched. Daesung leaned forward. Why? That is what we all wanted to know. Then the survey ships went in. 3 of them. Sent to map the systems beyond human space. Standard exploration, nothing threatening. Bora's eye clusters dimmed. None of them came back. No distress signals. No debris, no trace. They just vanished. What happened to them? No one knows. Or if they know, they are not telling. But after that, the consortium stopped sending ships into that region. Just drew a line on the map and said, why, that is far enough. Bora ordered another drink. Then humans showed up asking to join the consortium. And everyone said yes immediately, no debate. You know how rare that is? Some species wait decades for membership approval. Humans got it in 3 months. Daesung's mind raced. Did anyone ever try to find out what happened to those survey ships? Kid, no one wanted to find out. It was like the whole galaxy just agreed to not talk about it. Even now, mention those ships and people changed the subject. It is the damnedest thing. Bora studied him. Why are you really asking? This is not academic curiosity. I work with maps. The old ones. And I noticed they all stop at the same place. Bora was quiet for a long moment. Then you have noticed what we all pretend not to see. My advice, stop noticing. Nothing good comes from asking questions the galaxy has decided not to answer. But Daesung could not stop. He spent 2 more days searching, finally finding a lead on a human who might talk. Taemin was listed as a retired historian, living in a quiet district of Veltara. It took 6 messages before the old man agreed to meet. They met in a public park. Taemin was thin and gray, with the careful movements of someone carrying old injuries. He studied Daesung for a full minute before speaking. You are the cartographer asking questions. Hijin told me about you. I just want to understand. No. Taemin's voice was sharp. You want to know. Understanding comes later if you survive it. He pulled out a small data chip. This contains 1 image. 1 single piece of information. If I show you, you cannot unsee it. You cannot pretend you do not know. Are you sure you want this? Daesung's hands trembled, but he nodded. Taemin activated the chip. A hologram appeared between them, showing a small probe. It looked ancient, primitive compared to modern spacecraft. Its hull was marked with strange scorch patterns, as if something had tried to burn it away at a molecular level but failed. Voyager 2, Taemin said quietly, launched from Earth in 1977 in your calendar system. A simple probe, meant to study our solar system and then drift forever in interstellar space. It carried messages about humanity, golden records with music and greetings. He zoomed in on the hull markings. We found this probe 50,000 light-years from Earth, still transmitting its messages, still functional after crossing distances it should have taken millions of years to traverse. Daesung stared. That is impossible. The probe would need to be carried or thrown, or pulled through space by something that does not obey the physics you understand. Taemin closed the image. That probe should have been 2 light-years from Earth, drifting in empty space. Instead, it had traveled 50,000 light-years and was trying to come home. What moved it? That is the question that ends conversations, young cartographer. Taemin stood up slowly. Someone noticed our little probe out in the dark, and they sent it back to us. Whether as a warning, a message, or something else entirely, we may never know. Before Daesung could ask more, a familiar figure approached. Ambassador Kaiwan of the Krillian Diplomatic Corps, one of the consortium's senior representatives. The ambassador's presence here in a random park could not be coincidence. Daesung. Taemin. Kaiwan's voice was measured and diplomatic. May I join you? It was not really a question. The three of them sat in tense silence until Kaiwan spoke again. I have a proposition for you, young Daesung. A classified diplomatic mission into human space authorized at the highest levels. You will get answers to your questions. All of them. Or, Kaiwan pulled out a datapad. You can accept this research grant to study the Andromeda Galaxy. Full funding. Your choice of team. Complete autonomy. You will have a distinguished career studying anything except this particular mystery. And if I refuse both? Then you continue your life never knowing, always wondering. The questions will eat at you, but you will be safe. Kaiwan's expression was unreadable. But I do not think you are capable of refusing. I recognize the look in your eyes. I wore it once, many years ago. You went into human space. I did, and I learned why the maps stop. Kaiwan stood. The mission leaves in 2 days. If you are coming, be at Docking Bay 17 at dawn. If you are not, I will never contact you about this again. Choose carefully. The ambassador walked away, leaving Daesung and Taemin alone. The old human smiled sadly. You are going, aren't you? Yes. Then I will give you one piece of advice. When you see what is out there, remember this. Humanity did not create the boundary where your maps stop. We became the boundary. There is a difference. Taemin stood with effort. Good luck, cartographer. You are going to need it. Daesung sat in the park long after both men left, watching the sun set over Velthara Prime. In 2 days, he would cross the boundary that every map marked as the edge of known space. He would learn what humanity guarded so carefully, what secret the entire galaxy conspired not to discuss. He should have been afraid. Part of him was. But mostly, he felt the thrill of approaching a truth that had been hidden for 2 centuries. He had no idea how that truth would change everything. The human Navy vessel Resolute was nothing like the civilian ships Daesung had traveled on before. Every surface was reinforced metal. Every corridor had emergency bulkheads, and every crew member moved with military precision. Even the cargo hauler he glimpsed in the docking bay had weapons hardpoints. Ambassador Kaiwan noticed his expression. Humanity does not build civilian vessels the way other species do. Every ship that leaves their space is ready for war. Commander Jiwoo met them at the airlock. The human woman was compact and efficient, her uniform crisp and her eyes constantly scanning. She saluted Kaiwan and nodded to Daesung. Welcome aboard. I'm your escort for this mission. Stay close, follow instructions immediately, and do not touch anything without asking. Understood? Her tone allowed no argument. Daesung nodded quickly. The journey to the border took 3 days. During that time, Daesung noticed dozens of small details that made him uncomfortable. Every human crew member he saw was armed. The ship ran constant combat drills, and the navigation officer tracked their position with an intensity that suggested they were flying through hostile territory, not empty space. On the 3rd day, they arrived at Jericho Station. The border outpost hung in space like a fortress, bristling with weapons and surrounded by patrol ships. Beyond it, a massive nebula spread across the view screen like a dark curtain. The navigation charts labeled it the Shroud. Governor Young Sik greeted them in the station's conference room. He was an older man, his hair silver, his face marked with lines that spoke of long service and little sleep. He shook their hands with formal courtesy, but his smile never reached his eyes. Ambassador, cartographer, thank you for coming. Young Sik gestured to the windows. I know you have questions. Before I answer them, I want you to meet someone who can explain better than I can. A woman entered, carrying a datapad and moving with the distracted energy of someone whose mind was always elsewhere. I'm Sun Hee, Xenoarchaeology, specializing in predecessor artifacts. She looked at Daesung. You wanted to know why the maps stop at human space. Come with me, I'll show you. They walked to an observation deck that faced the nebula. Sun Hee adjusted the view screen, filtering out the gas and dust that made up the shroud. Behind it, something massive appeared. Structures vast and geometric that hurt to look at. Their angles were wrong. Their proportions violated principles of engineering that Daesung had thought were universal. Gates, Sun Hee said quietly. Ancient, indestructible, and active. Daesung stared. The structures were enormous, each one large enough to swallow entire fleets. 7 of them hung in space, arranged in a pattern that suggested purpose, though what purpose he could not guess. 380 years ago, Commander Jiwoo began, her voice flat and factual, Humanity detected signals from deep space. We were excited. First proof of alien life. We sent ships to investigate. She pointed at the nearest gate. We found these, and we found what came through them. Sun-Hee pulled up files on her datapad. The war lasted 80 years. Most of it was fought out here, in the space beyond what's now our borders. We don't talk about it. The consortium doesn't know about it. But it happened. What were you fighting? Kaiwan asked, his diplomatic composure cracking slightly. Things that shouldn't exist. Sun-Hee's hands shook as she worked the controls. Images appeared. Battle footage, sensor logs, after-action reports. Daesung watched ships fight entities that moved through space like cancer, spreading through healthy tissue. He saw weapons that should not work, physics that should not function, and death on a scale that made his mind refuse to process the numbers. 40 billion humans died in that war, Governor Young-sik said. Almost a quarter of our total population at the time. Every person serving at Jericho Station has ancestors who fought. Every human you've met today lost family. But you won, Daesung said weakly. Barely, at a cost that nearly destroyed us. Jiwoo pulled up a tactical display. We learned to fight enemies that thought in dimensions we couldn't perceive. We developed weapons that could kill probability itself. We became monsters to fight monsters. And when it was finally over, when we sealed the gates and drove them back, we faced a choice. Sun-Hee took over. The consortium had been observing us throughout the war. They didn't interfere because they didn't understand what they were seeing. Our battles looked like natural phenomena on their sensors. By the time they realized we were fighting something, it was almost over. We could have told them the truth, Young-sik said, but we knew what would happen. Some species would panic. Some would try to flee through our space to get away from the gates. Others would come to investigate, would poke at things best left alone. The war would start again, but this time the entire galaxy would be drawn in. So we made a different choice. Jiwoo finished. We erased everything. Every battlefield, every wreck, every piece of evidence. We scrubbed this entire region of space clean. Then we joined the consortium and quietly made sure everyone understood. Human space is off limits. But the maps, Daesung said. They stopped showing this region before you could have erased anything. Maps made before you even met the consortium show the same boundaries. Sun-Hee smiled grimly. You're clever, yes? Want to know why? She pulled up another file. During the war, we discovered something. The gates affect perception. Species that get too close feel an overwhelming urge to turn back. Not fear, exactly. More like a certainty that there's no reason to go further. Every exploration ship that approached this region felt it. They didn't know why, but they all chose to stop. The gates were protecting themselves, Kaiwan breathed, making sure no one got close enough to discover them. Until humans did. We pushed through that compulsion because we didn't know what it was. We thought it was just psychology, irrational fear. We forced ourselves forward. Jiwoo's expression was haunted. We wish we hadn't. After the war, we realized the gates effect was still working. Every species in the consortium instinctively avoided this region. They mapped up to the boundary and simply stopped, convinced they'd surveyed everything worth surveying. We encouraged that belief. We became the guardians of secrets we never wanted to learn. Daesung looked at the gates, trying to understand the enormity of what he was hearing. So you've been standing watch for 200 years, keeping the rest of us safe from something we don't even know exists. Yes. Why not just tell us? Let us help defend. An alarm cut him off. Red lights flashed throughout the station. Commander Jiwoo's communicator crackled to life. Urgent voices overlapping. Her face went pale. It's Gate 7. Energy signatures building. It's activating. Sun-Hee grabbed her datapad, hands flying across the controls. That's impossible. The seals have held for 2 centuries. They can't just... She stopped, staring at her readings. Oh no, no. What is it? Governor Young-sik demanded. The signature is building toward threshold. If it reaches critical... Sun-Hee looked up and Daesung saw real terror in her eyes. If it opens fully, everything we fought for, everyone who died, it will all have been for nothing. Jiwoo was already moving. I need to get back to my ship. Resolute needs to be combat ready in 10 minutes. Wait, Daesung called after her. This is the first time in 200 years? Why now? Jiwoo paused at the door. We don't know. Maybe the seals were always temporary. Maybe something on the other side has been testing them. Maybe we just got lucky for 2 centuries and our luck ran out. She met his eyes. Or maybe something called out and something else answered. Whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. The gate is opening and we have to stop what comes through. She left at a run. Around them, Jericho Station transformed into a war footing with terrifying efficiency. Klaxons blared. Crew members sprinted to their positions. Through the windows, Daesung watched ships that had been on routine patrol suddenly snap into formation like a choreographed dance of death. Ambassador Kai Wan stood frozen, watching the gate on the view screen. "This is why you never told us. This is why the maps stop." "Yes," Governor Youngsik said simply, "because knowing about the darkness doesn't make you stronger. It just means more people can't sleep at night. We chose to be the ones who stay awake. We chose to be the boundary between the galaxy and what lies beyond." He headed for the command center. "Now you're going to see why that choice required everything we had." Sun-hee pulled up tactical displays, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. "The Fifth Fleet is mobilizing. Admiral Hyunwoo is assuming command. If the gate opens fully—" She didn't finish. Daesung moved to the window, watching the human ships take up positions around Gate 7. Dozens of vessels, each one bristling with weapons that shouldn't exist, each one crewed by people who had grown up knowing their purpose was to stand between the galaxy and annihilation. The gate's energy readings climbed higher. In the distance, something vast began to stir, and Daesung finally understood why every map in the galaxy stopped at human space. Because beyond that line, humanity had drawn a different kind of map, one written in sacrifice, marked by graves and guarded by people who chose to remember what the galaxy was allowed to forget. The war humanity thought it had won was not over. It had only been sleeping, and now it was waking up. The remembrance system was not on any public star charts. Commander Jiwoo explained this during the frantic journey from Jericho Station. "After the war, we gathered everything here. Every memorial, every record, every piece of evidence. If you want to understand what we're facing, this is where you need to be." The Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel to a site that made Daesung's breath catch. Hundreds of human ships surrounded a structure so massive it seemed to bend space around itself. Gate 7. The ring was 300 kilometers in diameter, its surface covered in patterns that hurt to perceive. Energy crackled along its length like lightning frozen in time. "Welcome to the Remembrance," Jiwoo said quietly. "Population 1 million. All military. All volunteers. All descended from people who fought in the First War." Admiral Hyunwoo was waiting in the briefing room. He was younger than Daesung expected, maybe 50 in human years, but his eyes were ancient. He shook hands mechanically, his attention already back on the tactical displays covering every wall. "Status?" Hyunwoo asked his officers. "Gate energy at 70% of critical threshold and climbing. Rate of increase is accelerating. Estimate 90 minutes until full activation." The officer's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "Fleet disposition? Fifth Fleet in position. Weapons charged. All ships reporting ready for combat operations." Hyunwoo nodded and finally turned to Daesung and Kaiwan. "This is Gate 7. First one they used to enter our space 380 years ago. Last one we sealed 200 years ago. It's held all this time, until now. What changed?" Kaiwan asked. "We don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." Hyunwoo gestured to a woman working at a console. "Mi-kyung runs our early warning network. She can explain better than I can." Mi-kyung was thin and exhausted, the look of someone who had not slept properly in days. "The gates operate on principles we barely understand. They connect our space to somewhere else, not just another location in our universe. Somewhere fundamentally different, where physics work differently, where life evolved along paths that make no sense to us." She pulled up old battle footage. Daesung watched in horror as human ships fought things that phased through matter, that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, that seemed to think in geometries impossible to comprehend. Fleets were torn apart by weapons that unfolded ships into dimensions that should not exist. Entire planets were rendered uninhabitable by entities that saw organic life as a structural flaw to be corrected. "They weren't malicious," Mi-kyung explained. "That's what made it worse. They were trying to fix us, to correct what they saw as errors in the universe's design. They couldn't understand why we resisted being geometrically optimized." "How did you fight them?" Daesung whispered. "We learned." Commander Sojin spoke from the doorway. She commanded the memorial garrison, her uniform marked with decorations Daesung did not recognize. "We studied their physics. We built weapons that could hurt things that existed outside normal space. We trained crews to fight enemies that operated on quantum principles. And we died. God, how we died. She walked to a window overlooking the memorial fields. Daesung followed and felt his legs go weak. Stretching to the horizon in every direction were white markers, millions of them, billions, each one marking a human who had died fighting a war the galaxy never knew about. 40 billion names, Sojin said. We're still engraving them. It takes time marking that many graves. My grandmother's out there somewhere. Row 47 million, marker 812,000. She died when her ship rammed a gate to stop something from coming through. She was 19 years old. Daesung could not speak. The scale of loss was incomprehensible. We became what we needed to become. Sojin continued. We learned to kill probability itself. We developed weapons that could erase things from causality. We turned our ships into weapons, our people into warriors, our entire civilization into a sword pointed at the throat of an enemy that shouldn't exist. Her voice cracked slightly, and we won. We sealed the gates, we drove them back, and we've been keeping watch ever since. An alarm interrupted them. Mikyung's console lit up with urgent warnings. Gate energy at 90%. It's accelerating faster than predicted. We have maybe 30 minutes. Admiral Hyunwoo was instantly alert. All ships to combat stations. Weapons free. If that gate opens, we light up anything that comes through with everything we have. The briefing room transformed into a command center. Officers called out reports. Tactical displays showed the fleet moving into attack formation. Daesung watched human ships position themselves with perfect precision, each one ready to die if necessary to stop what might emerge. Ambassador, Hyunwoo said to Kaiwan, now you see what we've been protecting you from. Now you understand why we never told the consortium. Would your people have believed us? Would they have understood? Or would they have panicked or worse tried to investigate? We would have helped, Kaiwan said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you would have made it worse. Not through malice, but through ignorance. These things don't fight wars the way you understand them. They don't have territory to defend or resources to conquer. They see organic life as a mistake and they try to fix it. How do you negotiate with something that wants to optimize you out of existence? The gate's energy reading spiked. On the view screen, the massive ring began to glow with light that hurt to look at. Not visible light exactly, but something that bypassed the eyes and stabbed directly into the brain. Critical threshold reached, Mikyung reported, her voice tight. The gate is opening. All ships prepare to engage, Hyunwoo ordered. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. Remember who we protect. The gate opened. Reality tore like paper. Through the breach, something vast and wrong began to push through. Daesung's mind refused to process what he was seeing. Shapes that existed in too many dimensions. Colors that should not be possible. Movement that happened in directions that had no names. Contact, Mikyung shouted. Multiple signatures. Classification unknown. Profiles match historical records. Open fire, Hyunwoo commanded, his voice calm and cold. The Fifth Fleet unleashed weapons that defied description. Missiles that erased their targets from probability. Beams that collapsed quantum states. Mines that exploded in dimensions perpendicular to normal space. The gate area became a maelstrom of impossible physics and deliberate violence. The entity coming through the gate recoiled. It tried to adapt, to phase through the attacks, to exist in states that would make it invulnerable. But humanity had fought these things before. Every weapon, every tactic, every desperate strategy learned over 80 years of war was being employed now. A human cruiser took a hit from something that looked like crystallized thought. The ship's hull unfolded along impossible angles, and 300 crew members died in ways that physics should not allow. But even as it died, the cruiser fired its last weapons, targeting the entity's connection to the gate. Direct hit on primary target, an officer reported. Entity is destabilizing. The battle raged for 6 hours. 6 hours of humanity throwing everything it had at things that should not exist. Ships died. Thousands of people sacrificed themselves to buy seconds. But slowly, painfully, the humans pushed the entities back through the gate. Finally, Admiral Hyunwoo gave the order. Seal it. Use Protocol Omega. Daesung did not understand what Protocol Omega meant until he saw it. 3 ships, specially modified, flew directly into the gate. They detonated something inside the breach, and the gate's light flickered and dimmed. Reality reasserted itself with a shudder that Daesung felt in his bones. The gate closed. The entities were gone. But 9 ships had been destroyed and over 2,000 humans were dead. The command center was silent. Admiral Hyunwoo slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. Damage reports. Casualty counts. And someone check the other gates. I want to know if this was isolated or if they're all waking up. Commander Sojin sat next to Dae-sung, her face gray with exhaustion. Now you know. This is what we do. This is what we've always done. What we'll keep doing until either we fail or we find a way to destroy the gates permanently. How long can you hold? Kaiwan asked quietly. We held for 2 centuries. Maybe we can hold for 2 more. Maybe the next activation will be the one that breaks through. Sojin stood slowly. But we'll be here, standing watch, keeping the rest of you safe, because someone has to. Outside, through the window, Dae-sung could see crews already recovering bodies, repairing ships, preparing for the next time, because there would be a next time. The gate had activated once. It would activate again, and when it did, humanity would be ready. Not because they wanted to be, not because they chose this burden, but because they were the only ones who could carry it. The memorial field stretched to the horizon, a sea of white markers commemorating those who had already paid the price. Soon there would be 2,000 more names to add, and someday perhaps millions more, but not today. Today humanity had held the line once again. Dae-sung finally understood why the maps stopped at human space. They stopped because humanity never did. The journey back to Jericho Station was quiet. Dae-sung sat in the Resolute's observation deck, watching the stars and trying to process what he had witnessed. Ambassador Kaiwan joined him after several hours, the normally composed diplomat looking shaken and old. I have to report to the council, Kaiwan said. They detected the energy spike. Half the consortium's sensor networks registered something happening in this sector. They're demanding answers. What will you tell them? The truth, or as much of it as they can handle. Kaiwan sat heavily. The question is what happens next. Do we tell everyone? Do we militarize the entire consortium? Do we prepare for a war most species can't even comprehend? Before Dae-sung could answer, Commander Jiwoo appeared. The Secretary General is here. Arrived on a fast courier an hour ago. He wants to speak with both of you. Secretary General Junho was waiting in the station's diplomatic suite. He was a compact man with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his life making impossible decisions. He poured tea with steady hands, the ritual seeming absurdly normal given the circumstances. Ambassador Kaiwan, cartographer Dae-sung, thank you for agreeing to meet. Junho sipped his tea. I assume you have questions. Why did you let us see? Dae-sung asked. You've kept this secret for 2 centuries. Why reveal it now? Because secrets have weight. And we've been carrying this one alone for too long. Junho set down his cup. When we sealed the gates 200 years ago, we thought we had won. We thought we could stand watch forever, keeping the galaxy safe without anyone knowing. But the gates are getting stronger. The seals are weakening. Eventually, we'll need help. Better to control how the truth comes out than to have it exposed during a crisis we can't contain. So this was a test, Kaiwan said. You let Dae-sung discover the truth to see how we'd react. Partly. Also because he earned it. He asked questions everyone else was too comfortable to ask. He deserves answers. Junho pulled up a holographic display showing the consortium's member species. Here's our dilemma. If we tell everyone, some will panic. Trade will collapse. Some species might try to flee through our space, making the situation worse. Others will demand access to the gates to study them and accidentally trigger another incursion. But if you don't tell them, they can't prepare, Dae-sung protested. When the gates fully open, if the gates fully open, Junho interrupted gently, no amount of preparation will matter. We barely survived the last war and we had 80 years to learn how to fight. If all 7 gates activate simultaneously, humanity won't be enough. The entire galaxy won't be enough. The room fell silent. Finally, Kaiwan spoke. Then what do you propose? A middle path. We inform select military leaders from each species, create a classified defense committee, share our knowledge and technology with those who can use it responsibly, train joint forces, but keep the full truth contained to those who need to know. Junho looked at them both. It's not perfect. It's not fair, but it gives us time to prepare without causing galaxy-wide panic. And you want us to help sell this to the council, Kaiwan said. I want you to tell them what you saw, what you learned, and let them make their choice. Junho stood. In 3 days, there will be an emergency consortium council session. You'll present your findings. The council will vote on whether to acknowledge the threat and work with us, or maintain the silence and trust our watch. 3 days later, Dae-sung stood before the Galactic Consortium Council. The chamber was vast, with representatives from 200 species arrayed in tiers around a central platform. He had never been in such an august setting, had never imagined he would address the galaxy's leaders. Ambassador Kai Wan spoke first, laying out the facts with diplomatic precision. The ancient gates, the war humanity fought in secret, the ongoing threat. His words were measured and calm, giving no hint of the horror he had witnessed. Then it was Dae-sung's turn. He looked out at the assembled representatives and saw confusion, skepticism, fear. Council Speaker Dalthor gestured for him to proceed. Dae-sung took a breath and began. I am a cartographer. I make maps. I asked a simple question. Why do all our maps stop at human space? I thought I would find a bureaucratic error, maybe a historical quirk. Instead, I found this. He showed them the battle footage, the gates, the entities that should not exist, the memorial fields stretching to the horizon. 200 species watched in silence as humanity's secret war played out before them. I asked why our maps stopped at human space. Dae-sung continued. Now I know. They stopped because humanity never did. When they found the gates, they could have run. They could have sealed their borders and hoped the threat would go away. Instead, they fought. They died by the billions. And they won. Then they stood watch for 200 years, protecting all of us from something we didn't even know existed. He paused, looking at the faces around him. Secretary General Jun Ho is asking you to acknowledge this threat, to prepare, to share the burden humanity has carried alone. But I think he's also asking something harder. Can we trust each other with the truth? Can we work together against something that sees all organic life as a mistake? Can we be worthy of the sacrifice humanity has made on our behalf? Council Speaker Dalthor called for discussion. For 6 hours, representatives debated. Some wanted full disclosure. Others argued for maintaining secrecy. A few even suggested abandoning the region entirely, letting humanity deal with their own problem. Finally, a vote was called. The resolution: acknowledge the classified threat, establish a joint defense committee, share technology and training with select forces, but maintain public silence. It passed with 70% support. Dalthor addressed the chamber. We accept humanity's truth. We acknowledge their sacrifice. And we commit to standing with them should the gates open again. May we prove worthy of their trust. After the session, Secretary General Jun Ho found Dae-sung in a quiet corridor. The council has authorized a new position, liaison to the Joint Defense Committee. They want someone who understands both the threat and the need for secrecy, someone who can work with human forces while representing consortium interests. He smiled slightly. You interested? You want me? I'm just a cartographer. You're a cartographer who asked questions no one else would ask, who saw the truth and didn't run from it, who understood why the map stopped. Junho extended his hand. We need people like you, people who can look at the darkness and still choose to stand against it. Dae-sung thought about the memorial fields, the billions of names, the humans who had died fighting a war the galaxy never knew about. He thought about Commander Sojin, Admiral Hyunwoo, all the people who woke up every day knowing their purpose was to be a shield for others. Yes, he said, I accept. 6 months later, Dae-sung stood on the Remembrance watching human and alien crews train together. The Joint Defense Force was small, but it was growing. Ships from a dozen species now patrolled the boundary, learning to use weapons that bent physics and to fight enemies that shouldn't exist. Commander Sojin found him at the memorial fields. He had been coming here often, walking among the markers, reading names of people who had died long before he was born. Why do you come here? Sojin asked. To remember. So their sacrifice means something. It means everything. It means the galaxy survived. Sojin looked at the endless rows of markers. You asked me once why humanity joined the consortium. After 80 years of war, why seek out more aliens? I remember. It's because we learned we couldn't do it alone. We won the war, but barely. We knew if the gates opened again, if the enemy returned in full force, humanity alone wouldn't be enough. She smiled sadly. We needed friends, allies, people who would stand with us when the darkness came back. We just couldn't tell you what you'd be standing against. And now we know. And now you know. So Jin started walking back toward the command center. The gates are still there. The seals are weakening. One day, maybe soon, they'll all open at once. When that happens, we'll need everyone. Every ship, every warrior, every species working together. Think the galaxy is ready? Dae-sung looked at the joint training exercises, at aliens learning human tactics and humans learning alien perspectives. It wasn't much. It might not be enough. But it was a start. They will be. We'll make sure of it. That evening, Dae-sung returned to his new office and pulled up the galactic maps. The same maps that had started his journey. The ones that stopped at human space. He looked at them with new understanding. The map stopped because someone had to draw a line between the galaxy and the abyss. Humanity had chosen to be that line, to stand in the darkness so others could live in the light. For 2 centuries, they had carried that burden alone. But not anymore. Dae-sung opened a new file and began updating the charts. The blank space beyond human territory got a new designation, one that would be shared only with those cleared to know. The Vigil. Outside his window, human ships continued their endless patrol. But now they weren't alone. Ships from the Vrelin, the Krillian, the Thorian, and a dozen other species flew alongside them. The watch would continue. The gates would be guarded. And the galaxy, ignorant of the threat, would sleep peacefully. Because at the edge of space where the map stopped, sentinels stood watch. They had stood for 200 years. They would stand for 200 more. And now, finally, humanity wouldn't stand alone. The map still stopped at human space. But the meaning had changed. They stopped because that's where the Guardians began. Where sacrifice became purpose. Where a species that had nearly been destroyed became the shield that protected all life in the galaxy. Dae-sung saved his work and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the boundary where every map ended, the gates waited. Silent for now. But not forever. When they opened again, the galaxy would be ready. Not because everyone knew the truth, but because enough people knew. Enough people cared. Enough people had chosen to stand at the edge and say no further. The map stopped at human space. And that, Dae-sung finally understood, was exactly where they should stop. Because beyond that line was not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of vigilance. The beginning of sacrifice. The beginning of hope. And as long as someone stood watch, as long as the vigil continued, the galaxy would survive. The maps stopped. But the story, the real story, was just beginning.